Well, Paul, of course, ultimately appeals to Rome. That in itself is a gutsy challenge. He challenged the hostility of the greatest power the world had ever seen. And the very emperor to whom the appeal was made bears the ignominy of the first systematic persecution of Christians, which went on for several centuries and which ended in establishing the gospel on the ruins of that very empire. And it isn't improbable that Paul really foresaw the importance of his decision when he transferred his cause to the tribunal of Caesar. When he appeals to Caesar, he may very well have realized the path that he was engaging on. In Acts 19, he says he must visit Rome. He uses that expression in Acts 19:21. He had been longing for many years to visit the imperial city. Really? That's interesting. The heavenly vision strengthened his purpose because in Acts 23, you must testify in Rome, he's told. So, indeed he was. Now, it's interesting. Many people don't realize this, but I think some scholars believe, and I lean this way too, that the writings of Luke, I call it Luke Volume 1 and Luke Volume 2. We know it as the Gospel of Luke and the Book of Acts, were the legally required documentation that the law required to precede any appellate, anyone that's appealing to Caesar, had to have a full description of all the circumstances surrounding his appeal to precede him in that appeal. That makes all the sense in the world. It sounds like Roman law. And that's why many people regard Luke's writings that were sponsored for that very purpose. And so it's interesting when you read Luke, you can really, that seems to come through. Because Luke goes out of his way in his narrative to focus on the things that are of Roman concern. The main thing the Romans were concerned is keeping the peace. Their fear was an insurrection of any kind. And so Luke goes out of his way to emphasize that each uprising that he deals with, it was the Jewish leadership, not Paul and his companions, that were the cause of the uprising. And that's very much a defensive posture against what would be the very Roman concern. But there's something else you notice too if you watch carefully. All through Luke's writings, the centurions are always the good guys. Luke makes the point that at Capernaum, the synagogue there was paid for by the centurion. And everywhere you go, if you watch closely as you read Luke, both the Gospel and also the Book of Acts, it's a very, very interesting posture he takes in his writings there. And Paul remains in Rome for 2 whole years, we learn. But it didn't impede his missionary work, even while he's in prison. He'd written to the Romans 3 years prior, 6 full years before the persecutions of Nero began. And so he was a prisoner for 4 to 5 years, from AD 58 through about 63. Half of that time he was in Caesarea, and half that time in Rome. And during this period, he wrote 4 letters. He wrote to the Philippians, of course, the one we're so concerned with. He wrote to the Colossians and to the Ephesians. Those are 2 of my favorite letters. They're very special, and they give us insights that are available nowhere else. And then, of course, to Philemon, which is the ultimate example of an intercessory prayer and so forth. All of that was done from Rome. So even though he's in prison, he had a very, very effective ministry that echoes throughout the rest of history. And now, some scholars differ on this, but there seems to be evidence that Philippians is distinctive from the other 3 and may have been the earliest of that group of letters from Rome. And so